Just then, a sudden knock echoed from the door of their hospital room. The boys assumed it was probably a nurse making her rounds, or perhaps one of their parents coming to visit. However, when the door slowly opened, it wasn't a nurse standing there. Instead, Charlie calmly peeked his head into the room. The moment his classmates saw him standing there perfectly fine, their faces turned pale with shock and disbelief. Charlie casually explained that he heard they had studied so hard that they ended up in the hospital, so he decided to come by and check on them. The boys stared at him, unable to process what they were seeing. They truly couldn't believe that Charlie was alive and walking around like nothing had happened. Charlie smiled slightly and said that he had even brought them a few snacks to help them recover. He walked over to Ashton and offered him some sausages and milk, but Ashton stubbornly told him to keep it for himself. Ashton grumbled that he didn't need any of Charlie's charity. Johnson quickly stepped in and apologized to Charlie, explaining that Ashton simply didn't know how to behave properly. Suddenly, one of their classmates excitedly told everyone to grab their phones and check the school's online community page. Apparently, someone had posted something shocking about their group leader online. When the boys looked at their phones, their hands began shaking. The screen showed pictures of Charlie pinning a terrified Terrence against a tree. Seeing that evidence, Ashton instantly realized he needed to change his attitude. He awkwardly thanked Charlie for visiting them and for bringing food. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of that very same hospital, a patient from the psychiatric ward stood alone at the edge. He stared down at the city far below his feet, quietly reflecting on the miserable path his life had taken. His mind drifted back to a painful memory from just days ago. His wife had walked into his room and thrown divorce papers directly in his face. She had already found herself a new boyfriend and coldly told him to sign the documents quickly, reminding him that he didn't have much time left to live anyway. The man couldn't understand why she couldn't even wait until he died. She hadn't even felt ashamed bringing her new lover right in front of him. With tears filling his eyes, the man stepped forward and jumped from the roof, realizing that after 10 years of marriage, his wife seemed to have lost every trace of conscience. Back in the hospital room, the boys from the second group continued talking. Charlie's classmates suddenly asked if he had really broken a tree in front of Terrence. Charlie casually pointed toward one of the trees standing outside the ward window and said that the one he broke was about the same size. Just as Charlie pushed the window open to point it out more clearly, the man who had jumped from the roof suddenly came falling straight toward him. People on the street below screamed in shock as they saw what was happening, unable to believe the terrifying sight unfolding above them. In that split second, Charlie sensed something strange. He quickly turned around and looked out the open window. To everyone's astonishment, he managed to grab the falling man by the arm just in time, stopping him from plunging to the ground. With surprising strength, Charlie pulled the man upward and dragged him through the window into the hospital room. The boys stared in disbelief. None of them could understand how Charlie managed to pull a grown adult through a window using just one hand. Charlie looked at the shaken man and calmly asked why he had decided to jump. The man looked back and asked in return why Charlie had bothered saving him. The stranger explained that he was terminally ill and had little time left. His wife had found herself a younger lover and forced him to sign divorce papers. Charlie thought for a moment and said that the director always claimed that sometimes you just need to cry, and eventually the pain will fade away. Hearing those simple words, the man suddenly collapsed against Charlie's leg and burst into uncontrollable tears. At that exact moment, a doctor and several orderlies rushed into the ward, shocked to discover that the falling patient had actually been saved. They immediately asked Charlie how he had managed to do such a thing, while the orderlies gently escorted the rescued man away. Just then, Charlie's classmates noticed something alarming. Blood was dripping from his hand. Only then did Charlie realize that he had broken his arm while pulling the man through the window. The boys were stunned. They couldn't believe how calmly Charlie was acting even though his arm was clearly broken. Charlie simply told the doctor not to worry about it. He said it wasn't the first time he had suffered an injury like this, and it would probably heal soon. The doctor and the orderlies exchanged confused looks, unable to understand how a teenager could treat such a serious injury so casually. Still, they couldn't ignore the condition of his arm, so they brought him to the operating room. Charlie insisted that it was just a simple fracture and even said they didn't need anesthesia because enduring pain would strengthen his will. He quietly added that the atmosphere of a medical room like this strangely felt very familiar to him. The doctor assumed that the heavy blood loss and shock had probably affected the boy's sense of reality. Charlie tried to warn them that he didn't actually have any money to pay for anesthesia. He repeated that he really didn't have money for such treatment and that they shouldn't waste expensive medicine on him. But before he could finish explaining, the nurse calmly announced that the anesthetic had already been administered. Charlie attempted to say one last thing about not having enough money, but the medication quickly took effect, and his words faded away as he drifted into sleep. At that moment, the system quietly informed him that he had completed the mission with excellent performance, and it was now time for him to leave this place and return to his original body. 3 seconds later, Levi suddenly returned to his original body as if nothing unusual had happened. Jasper immediately leaned closer, curiosity written all over his face, and kept asking Levi what that strange voice in his head had been telling him. Levi slowly looked around the room with a confused expression, clearly struggling to understand what had just happened and why everything suddenly felt normal again. He glanced at Jasper and asked in a skeptical tone if he truly wanted to hear what that crazy voice inside his head had been saying the whole time. Then Levi casually explained that the voice claimed he had been sent somewhere else and had turned into some sickly kid who walked around wearing women's pajamas. Meanwhile, Charlie had also returned to his own body. After undergoing surgery, he was resting in the hospital, and before long his mother arrived to visit him. After a while, Charlie slowly woke up, blinking in confusion as he tried to understand where he was and what exactly had happened to him. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his arm. The sensation was so intense that he immediately burst into tears and cried out loudly for his mother to help him. After some time had passed and his condition improved, the real Charlie finally returned to school again. However, he became extremely nervous when he realized his mother hadn't come inside with him yet, even though she had already parked the car. He really didn't want to walk into school alone. When he nervously turned toward the school building, he suddenly froze. Standing in front of him was a huge crowd of students, and leading them was the school's most feared bully, Terrence. Charlie's entire body began trembling with fear, and tears quickly filled his eyes as he imagined what might happen next. But then something completely unexpected happened. One after another, the students suddenly knelt down before him and respectfully greeted him as their boss. At that exact moment, the school's loudspeaker system broadcast an announcement thanking a student named Charlie for his bravery and for saving other people during the recent incident. Not far away, the girl who had once wanted to give him a love letter watched everything quietly from behind a tree. Seeing how Charlie had suddenly become a legend at school, she felt that she was now just an ordinary girl who could never match him. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the headquarters of a special unit, where a heated argument had broken out among the people gathered there. Luhi, a 9th-rank warrior from the Supreme Deist Academy, firmly stated that the rumors were impossible and that the idea of demons becoming smarter sounded completely ridiculous. However, Dowing, a 9th-rank warrior from the Manhwa Academy, argued that if demons truly began developing higher intelligence, humanity itself might face extinction. He even joked bitterly that there was no point holding meetings anymore. They might as well go home, prepare their affairs, and write suicide notes. The man sitting at the head of the table immediately said that such a joke was not funny at all. Sage, another 9th-rank warrior from the Higher Academy of Doctors, calmly said he didn't understand why everyone was panicking so much. Whether monsters became smarter or not shouldn't concern them that deeply. The man at the head of the table suddenly slammed his hand against the desk and declared that this was not speculation anymore. It was already confirmed fact. Master Umar, a 9th-rank warrior from the highest Buddhist academy, calmly remarked that those who feared should not blame others, because true mercy belonged to those who understood fear. But the man sharply ordered him to remain silent. He explained that if demon intelligence had truly increased, demons of equal rank could become far stronger opponents than before, which meant the city division itself could be in serious danger. Sage quietly added that they had already sent out an alert to warn the surrounding regions. Dowing shrugged and said that low-rank warriors would never be able to handle such a threat, so perhaps old men like them should take the job themselves. After all, dying in battle sounded better than dying from boredom. Before he could continue speaking, The man abruptly raised his hand and launched a small light spell toward him, silencing the conversation. The man was known by the nickname One Eye. He was the strongest member of the city's special unit and a national-level warrior. Calmly, he warned that if they didn't want to die, they should start praying that more warriors would appear in the city soon. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a cheerful birthday celebration was taking place inside the office of the psychiatric hospital's director. The director was extremely happy to see that so many nurses and orderlies had gathered for the celebration. They congratulated him warmly, wishing him a long life and praising him as the best boss they had ever worked with. Sean gently closed his eyes for a moment, planning to make a simple birthday wish that everything would go smoothly and peacefully for the rest of the day. But before he could finish, an orderly suddenly burst into the office in a panic and shouted that the patients from room 666 had started a strike and were convincing other patients to join them. It soon became clear that Levi and Jasper were the ones leading the rebellion, waving handmade signs and loudly demanding something from the hospital staff. Other patients even brought them strange offerings, thinking they were giving the boys things they might need. However, Levi and Jasper quickly rejected the gifts, saying that those items were not what they were asking for. Hearing the commotion, the director finally stepped out into the corridor to see what exactly was going on. The boys proudly held up their posters and pointed at them, insisting that the hospital needed to provide exactly what was written there. The director shook his head and refused their demand, which caused Levi and Jasper to exchange a knowing glance. Without another word, they suddenly collapsed onto the floor and began loudly demanding what was written on their signs. The exhausted director closed his eyes for a moment and sighed, telling the orderlies to simply take whatever it was from the warehouse and give it to the boys. Unfortunately, the orderlies had no idea what they were supposed to bring. Soon enough, several massive dumbbells weighing 100 kilograms each were brought into the ward, along with a punching bag. The patients were extremely happy with their new training equipment. However, after a short time, the punching bag had already been torn apart and its fillings scattered across the floor. Even the heavy dumbbells were bent and damaged, as if someone had struck them with incredible force. Despite the destruction, the patients were delighted. They proudly claimed that thanks to this training, they had already reached the level of real warriors. Meanwhile, the story shifted again, this time to the city's dark sewer tunnels where a brutal battle was unfolding between warriors and hordes of demonic rats. One of the warriors desperately fought back while shouting a prayer, asking the heavens to grant him the strength to survive the fight. He quickly summoned several magical scrolls and decided to activate all three at once, unleashing powerful fire spells. The blazing attacks soon slammed into the monstrous second-rank demon known as the Morning Dog. The creature was enormous, nearly 50 times larger than the warriors standing before it, and its glowing red eyes glared down at them with terrifying menace. Then Selena activated a support technique known as the First Form, Yellow Pill Triple Boost, strengthening one of her allies and urging him to launch his attack. The young warrior nodded and invoked a technique called the Sword of Inaction. Moments later, the glowing blade shot forward and pierced deeply into the demonic dog's shoulder. This injury only enraged the demon further, and it prepared to attack the warriors with even greater ferocity. Seeing their comrade in danger, the other warriors rushed forward, shouting that they would fight together. One of them raised a string of prayer beads and activated the golden body of the Arhat spell, surrounding his allies with a powerful protective barrier. Watching this, the demonic dog bared its sharp teeth and snarled viciously. Then the monster lifted its enormous paw, preparing to strike the warriors with crushing force. With a single brutal swing, it knocked Selena violently to the side. She slammed hard against the sewer wall, and blood immediately spilled from her mouth. The warriors stared in shock, realizing that the demon had deliberately targeted their healer first. At that moment, they understood that this was no ordinary demon, and one of them urgently ordered the others to carry Selena away from the battlefield. After giving the order, he summoned another spell and charged toward the demon again. Meanwhile, the warrior maintaining the protective shield could already feel his strength fading rapidly, knowing he could not hold it much longer. The demon sensed the weakness immediately. Until that moment, it had actually been holding back, almost as if it were testing its opponents. But now it moved with terrifying speed, and in a single brutal motion it tore the warrior apart. His companions froze in disbelief. Their faces twisted in horror as they stared at the horrifying sight in front of them, unable to process what had just happened. In their shock, they failed to notice that the demon was already preparing another strike. Just in time, one of the warriors shoved his teammates aside to push them out of the creature's path. But the attack came down directly on him. In a split second, the demon's massive claw pierced straight through his chest. With the last strength he had left, the dying warrior turned to his companion and quietly begged him to run and survive. A moment later, the life faded from his eyes. The remaining fighter stood there trembling uncontrollably. He turned toward Selena and desperately asked if she could still stand, but she gave no reply. Tears welled up in his eyes as panic took over. He shouted again and again, begging her to wake up and get to her feet. Finally, Selena slowly opened her eyes. Even though she was badly injured, she looked at her partner with a determined expression. Encouraged by her gaze, the warrior gripped his sword tightly and rushed forward toward the demon, determined to strike back no matter the cost. At that very moment, Selena forced herself to activate the second form of her technique, a secret pill ability that could multiply strength 6 times over. Almost instantly, the young warrior's body became surrounded by a glowing aura, filled with powerful energy granted by her spell. Sadly, that was the last thing Selena could do with the little strength she had left. The moment the spell was completed, her life slipped away. Even with the boost, the warrior's power was still not enough, and the demon slammed him down with its paw, pinning him to the ground with its claws. Using the last bit of strength in his body, the warrior attempted one final spell, hoping to drag the demon down with him. He activated a forbidden execution spell. His eyes burned with bright red light, while a powerful divine aura erupted from his body. A moment later, a thunderous explosion echoed through the sewer tunnels, and the demon let out a painful howl. But even that desperate attack was not enough. When the smoke finally cleared, the demon slowly emerged, still alive. Wounded and bleeding, the creature staggered toward the sewer exit, leaving a long trail of dark blood behind it. Meanwhile, the story returned to the mental hospital grounds. Levi and Jasper were sitting in the grass, with the blonde Levi counting ants while Jasper quietly meditated nearby. At that moment, the system suddenly informed Levi that he had successfully broken through to the human level in his energy cultivation technique. He had formed a foundation stage. From now on, energy around him would naturally flow into his body, continuously strengthening him. When Jasper turned around to proudly show Levi one of the ants he had been studying, he suddenly noticed a strange blue aura swirling gently around Levi. At first, Jasper thought Levi was seriously ill. Meanwhile, the system warned Levi that the ancient cultivation technique had reached a dangerous stage and that too much energy had accumulated in his body. Excited by what he thought was a breakthrough opportunity, Jasper quickly pulled out one of his acupuncture needles and poked Levi right in the middle of his forehead. He proudly called it the Milky Way rotation technique and began inserting more needles around Levi's head as if performing some mysterious medical ritual. Levi struggled to endure the pain as his face turned bright red from the overwhelming sensation. Suddenly, he sneezed loudly, and all the needles shot out of his head at once. The system calmly announced that the inner world of the host had successfully opened, the excess energy had stabilized, and the danger of his body exploding had now been removed. Levi turned to Jasper and said that he had heard the mysterious voice again in his head. It had been extremely painful, but he was grateful that Jasper had helped him. Jasper immediately rushed closer, his eyes shining with excitement, and eagerly asked if his Milky Way rotation technique had really worked. Levi smiled and honestly admitted that it really was quite an impressive and useful technique. However, he also added that there was one small problem. He was suddenly incredibly hungry. Then Levi casually picked up one of the ants and offered it to Jasper as a snack. He explained that he had once heard ants were actually very tasty if you tried them. Levi opened his mouth and was just about to eat the ant when a nurse stepped out onto the balcony and loudly announced that lunch was ready and patients should come to the dining hall. Hearing that, Jasper quickly tossed the ant back into the grass and walked with Levi toward the clinic building. Inside the dining hall, The other patients watched Levi in complete confusion as he devoured food with an almost endless appetite. Several empty trays were already piled near him, showing how much food he had eaten in such a short time. Soon a nurse approached the table and complained that the patient from room 66 was eating far too much food. She even called the manager for help because Levi refused to give up the tray he was currently eating from. The manager frowned and suggested that Levi might be suffering from some kind of eating disorder. Meanwhile, Levi looked down at the empty tray and realized he had finished everything again. Without thinking, he picked up a fork and began chewing on it. Just then, the system calmly informed him that opening his inner world had created a side effect. His body would now constantly feel hunger unless he consumed objects filled with strong energy. Meanwhile, members of the Special Forces arrived at the battlefield where the demonic dog had fought the warriors and began documenting the scene. The one-eyed commander stood nearby, silently watching everything unfold. Looking at the devastating battlefield and the scattered bodies, he muttered a curse under his breath. The dead warriors had all been top graduates from the 4 great academies, each of them a second-rank fighter. 4 of them had faced a single demon, and yet all 4 had died. He explained that a research team had already arrived to reconstruct the battle. From the evidence, it appeared a single second-rank demonic dog had defeated the group. One Eye flicked his cigarette to the ground and crushed it beneath his boot. Judging by the tracks, the wounded demon had retreated deeper into the sewer system. He warned the others that the sewer tunnels were not far from their current location, meaning the creature could still be nearby. He ordered one of the officers to inform the information department that the threat level of all demons should now be increased by 1 rank. Another officer added that the families of the fallen warriors had already been notified and were now calling repeatedly, demanding explanations. One Eye instructed them to collect the remains and personal belongings of the dead and return them to their families with proper condolences. As he walked toward the exit, he quietly muttered that despite their bravery, those warriors had also been incredibly reckless. He added coldly that this particular comment should definitely not be shared with the families. Meanwhile, back at the psychiatric hospital, the director was furious. He ordered his staff that if the monster responsible for the killings ever appeared near the hospital, they must immediately contact the special unit. Just then, one of the hospital workers rushed into his office and reported that the patient from room 666 had frightened the kitchen staff again. The director gave a tired laugh and asked what Levi had done this time. It turned out that earlier the doctors had decided Levi could no longer eat without supervision because his condition seemed to be getting worse. Meanwhile, the other patients quietly wondered why Levi wasn't being forced to pay for all the food he had eaten. Before the paramedics carried Levi away, he turned his head slightly toward Jasper and gave him a quick wink. In that small gesture, Jasper immediately understood that Levi was silently asking for his help. Being Levi's closest friend, Jasper didn't need any explanation. He already knew exactly what Levi expected him to do. Without saying another word, Jasper calmly walked over and sat down at one of the nearby tables, staring forward with a strangely serious and ominous expression. Suddenly, he began loudly banging his head against the table again and again, creating a shocking noise that immediately drew everyone's attention. Some of the other patients burst into laughter, thinking it was some kind of bizarre performance. Meanwhile, the nurses and orderlies looked completely confused, unsure how to react to such behavior. In the chaos that followed, the staff were forced to loosen their grip on Levi for a moment. Levi instantly seized the opportunity and slipped away from the dining hall. As he made his escape, Levi flashed Jasper a thumbs up, silently praising him for the excellent distraction. Not long after, Levi quietly made his way toward the hospital kitchen where several female cooks were working. He suddenly appeared behind them and spoke in a low, ominous voice, simply saying that he was hungry. The women turned around in fright, their faces instantly filled with horror when they saw him standing there. Since Levi had a reputation throughout the hospital, they immediately misunderstood his words and assumed he meant he wanted to eat people. But in reality, Levi had meant nothing like that at all. He genuinely just wanted food. When the director later heard this entire story, he even suggested giving the kitchen staff a bonus as compensation for the scare. After calming down, the director then asked one of the workers why Levi had suddenly become so unbelievably hungry. The worker explained that Levi had just undergone a medical examination earlier. The director nodded and told him to send the manager to his office as soon as the examination report was ready. Meanwhile, outside the hospital grounds, something unusual was happening near a sewer hatch. A clawed paw slowly emerged from the opening. It belonged to a monster that had crawled up from the sewer tunnels, sensing that this area seemed free of warriors. The creature climbed out fully and realized it was badly injured. It needed a safe place to rest and recover its wounds, and this location seemed perfect. Looking around, the monster noticed the nearby mental hospital and decided that would be the ideal place to hide. It understood that in order to heal faster, it would need food, and it believed the humans inside would unknowingly provide it. However, to gain their trust, the creature knew it had to disguise itself. In the next moment, the demon transformed into a small, injured puppy. It had heard that humans loved cute animals and could rarely resist helping a wounded dog. Satisfied with its disguise, the creature slowly approached the hospital building, preparing to deceive the foolish humans inside. Meanwhile, inside their room, Levi and Jasper were discussing Levi's broken watch. The watch needed repairs again, but unfortunately neither of them had any money to pay for it. Jasper jokingly suggested that kidnapping someone might be an easy way to earn money. He explained that since he had a girlfriend, he could pretend to kidnap her so she could secretly take his watch to be repaired and return later. Levi quickly corrected him, reminding Jasper that the girl he mentioned earlier wasn't just his lover, but actually his wife. At that moment, something suddenly hit the window with a soft thump, causing both boys to turn toward the sound. Levi leaned closer and noticed a tiny puppy standing outside the window. The demon dog had carefully chosen the cutest appearance possible, hoping that the humans would feel sympathy and start feeding him. Jasper pressed his face closer to the glass and commented that the puppy looked extremely adorable. The little dog stretched its body upward, barely reaching their window from the ground below. Jasper suggested that they should treat the injured puppy. Together, he and Levi opened the window and brought the small dog into their room. Levi suggested that Jasper should use his acupuncture skills to help the puppy heal. The disguised demon was shocked that anyone still practiced acupuncture. The puppy turned its head away, thinking these foolish humans would soon become easy prey. But Jasper had already taken out one of his needles. Before the demon could react, Jasper confidently stabbed the needle straight into its forehead. The demon dog trembled painfully, but Jasper happily assumed that the treatment was working perfectly. Laughing proudly, Jasper said he was sure the dog would recover very soon thanks to his skills. The dog's face twisted in silent horror as it desperately tried to stop him, but it couldn't move in time. Soon the poor creature's body was almost completely covered with acupuncture needles, making it feel as if it was about to die. At that moment, Jasper heard Levi's stomach growling loudly and assumed his friend was hungry again. Levi nodded and admitted that he had felt hungry the entire day. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of Levi, informing him that a high-energy food source had been discovered. According to the system, that food source was located directly in front of him. When Levi looked at the puppy, the system explained that the creature possessed second-rank energy and was technically edible despite being poisonous. The demon dog noticed Levi staring at it strangely and began to feel uneasy. Levi then turned to Jasper and calmly commented that the puppy really was very cute. After that, both boys slowly looked at the dog with unsettling expressions and quietly chuckled. Levi thoughtfully added that such a dog would probably taste very delicious. The demon dog was completely confused. It couldn't believe these two humans were seriously thinking about eating it. After all, it had taken on the most adorable form possible, yet they still wanted to cook it. At that moment, Jasper began removing the needles, explaining that if he didn't continue the acupuncture treatment, the dog would eventually die. He casually told Levi they should wait until the puppy died naturally before eating it. The demon realized that these two humans were completely insane. But as a second-rank demon, it knew it could recover quickly without their deadly acupuncture. Levi crouched down in front of the puppy and gently told it to close its eyes because it would soon rest peacefully. The demon internally laughed, convinced these arrogant humans had no idea what they were dealing with. Jasper then turned to Levi and pointed out that the puppy was still alive. Levi calmly replied that it wasn't a problem, noting that the dog was bleeding and would eventually die anyway. Hearing those words, the demon dog felt completely speechless, unsure how to react to such absurd humans. Levi glanced at the small dog and quietly assumed it was far too tiny to be of any real use. Even if they tried to cook it, he figured there probably wouldn't be enough meat on those thin little bones to properly fill their stomachs. The demon could feel his patience stretching to its absolute limit. Being mocked and treated like this by a group of boys was humiliating, and the anger boiling inside him made it almost impossible to stay calm any longer. In the very next instant, the creature abandoned its disguise. Its body twisted and expanded as it revealed its terrifying true form. Then it lunged forward at the boys with murderous intent. The demon burned with rage. The fact that these humans had actually made him tremble with anger was unbearable. Now his only desire was to tear them apart and make them regret ever provoking him. Seeing the creature suddenly grow to such an enormous size, Jasper's eyes lit up with excitement. Instead of being afraid, he happily realized that with a dog that big, they would finally have plenty of meat to eat. The demon dog opened its mouth wide, revealing rows of long, razor-sharp fangs. With a low growl rumbling in its throat, it rushed straight toward Jasper, clearly planning to devour him in a single bite. But before the beast could reach him, Levi calmly stepped into its path. In one swift and almost casual motion, he grabbed the demon's jaws and slammed the creature hard against the floor. Levi scolded the beast as if it were nothing more than a naughty pet. In a calm but firm voice, he told the dog that biting people was a very bad habit. The demon was completely stunned. He could not understand how this human had suddenly appeared and stopped his attack with such overwhelming strength. Still refusing to accept what had happened, the demon opened his massive jaws again. This time he tried to clamp down on Levi's hand and tear it clean off. Yet the moment his jaws snapped shut, he realized something shocking. No matter how hard he bit, Levi's hand remained completely unharmed, as if it were made of unbreakable steel. Jasper casually walked over to his friend, looking at the giant creature with curiosity. He cheerfully said that he wanted to try petting the dog's fur. Levi nodded without concern. He calmly replied that it was fine now, because the dog had already learned to behave and wouldn't cause any more trouble. The demon struggled desperately, trying to break free from Levi's grip, but nothing worked. For a second-rank demon like him, being restrained so easily was an unbearable humiliation. When Jasper reached out his hand, the demon tried once again to bite him. But Levi instantly struck the creature's mouth, knocking his teeth with another powerful blow. The impact shattered several of the demon's teeth. Blood immediately began to seep from his gums, dripping down as the creature groaned in pain. Levi leaned closer and spoke in a cold, threatening tone. He warned the dog very clearly that it was absolutely not allowed to bite his friend. Meanwhile, Jasper gently stroked the demon's thick fur as if nothing strange was happening. With a pleased smile, he said that the dog had really become obedient. Even though it looked big and scary, it was actually quite docile now. The demon lay there in stunned silence. He simply could not understand what kind of people these two were or how they could defeat him so effortlessly. At first he guessed that Levi might be a fourth-rank cultivator, but judging by the unbelievable strength Levi had just shown, his real level had to be far higher than that. Jasper continued happily petting the enormous dog. As he ran his hand along its body, he commented that even the creature's tail looked soft and fluffy. He then said he would love to see the dog wag its tail. Levi casually replied that since the dog was such a well-behaved boy now, it could simply wag its tail on its own. The demon glared at them with pure hatred. Through clenched teeth, he growled that he would never wag his tail like some pathetic household pet. However, his situation was extremely dangerous. Realizing his life might end at any moment, the demon decided to swallow his pride and temporarily obey them until he found a chance to escape from this terrifying man. Jasper then added another request. Instead of wagging the tail from side to side, he said he wanted to see the dog spin its tail in a circle. By this point, the demon was completely exhausted by their ridiculous demands. The constant humiliation had pushed his frustration to the breaking point. When Levi noticed the dog hesitating, he grabbed the creature again by its remaining teeth and tightened his grip with effortless strength. Levi tilted his head slightly and spoke to the dog as if giving friendly advice. He said that wagging the tail in a circle would actually look much cuter. Left with absolutely no other choice, the demon reluctantly obeyed the request of these two strange and terrifying humans. Watching the tail spin around awkwardly, Jasper clapped his hands with delight. He was genuinely thrilled by the strange performance. Levi then calmly remarked that this dog wasn't just cute. In his opinion, it also looked like it would taste quite delicious. After all, a small puppy would never have satisfied their hunger. But a large, fully grown dog like this was a completely different story. However, after thinking about it for a moment, the boys realized they had a problem. They didn't actually have any fire to cook the meat. Then their eyes drifted upward toward the bright lamps hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, an idea formed in their minds. They could simply roast the meat using the lamps. Jasper paused for a moment as he considered the plan. Then a confident smile spread across his face as he said he was sure it would work. He explained that when he once helped Levi cultivate using an electric current, he had clearly smelled the aroma of roasted meat. So using electricity again should work perfectly for roasting the dog. The demon was completely confused by everything he heard. At that moment, it felt as though he had encountered demons disguised as humans. Before long, the boys connected several bare wires directly to the demon's body. Then they allowed the electric current to run through him. Jasper watched the entire process with a satisfied smile, clearly pleased that their strange cooking method actually seemed to be working. From their windows, other patients in the hospital looked toward room 666. To them, it strangely appeared as if someone inside was dancing wildly. After a while, Jasper sniffed the air and happily announced that he could already smell the scent of roasting meat. Levi calmly reported that everything was almost finished. The demon struggled weakly, trying to stop the torture, but he no longer had any strength left. Not long afterward, the demon's life finally faded away. When the process was complete, Jasper walked over and gently touched the creature's burnt fur. Sometime later, the boys began cutting up the demon's body carefully, preparing to reach the meat they had just roasted. They sliced off a piece for themselves and immediately started eating, completely satisfied with their unusual meal. Unfortunately, their creative cooking method had an unexpected side effect. The heavy electrical load caused a power outage across the entire hospital. The hospital's new security guard, Liam, grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the dark hallway to investigate what had caused the sudden blackout. As he approached room 66, he noticed the fuses had blown nearby. Curious, he leaned closer and looked through the small window in the door. He shined his flashlight inside, and what he saw froze him in terror. The patients in the ward appeared to be holding someone's severed head. Liam's entire body trembled in horror. He could hardly believe what his own eyes were showing him. To make things even worse, it seemed as though the patient's eyes were glowing faintly with a sinister red light. Overcome by fear, Liam stumbled backward and collapsed onto the floor. The flashlight slipped from his trembling hands. Terrified, he jumped up and ran down the corridor while screaming that someone had been eaten in room 666. Soon the clinic director and several orderlies rushed toward the room to investigate. Liam kept insisting that he had seen a severed head and patients eating the flesh. By the time they arrived, the electricity had already been restored. When Sean switched on the light, he noticed that one of the lamps in the room had been broken. Levi and Jasper were quietly lying in their beds, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The director looked at them suspiciously and asked what exactly they had been doing inside the room. The boys calmly replied that they had simply made a carpet out of the dog's wool. The director was horrified when he looked down and realized that lying on the floor in front of their beds was indeed a carpet made from the fur of a huge demonic dog. Curious and uneasy, the director stepped closer to inspect it. He bent down, grabbed a tuft of the animal's fur, and pulled gently to see if it was real. The director stared at the tuft of fur in his hand with wide eyes. He could hardly believe what he was touching. This wasn't ordinary animal wool. It was the real fur of a second-ranked demon, something most people would never even see in their lifetime. Still trying to make sense of the situation, he turned toward the boys and demanded to know what they had been doing in the room. Levi and Jasper answered calmly, saying they had simply been sleeping the entire time. They insisted that they never even left their beds. According to them, nothing unusual had happened at all during the night. But Liam stubbornly refused to back down. He kept repeating that he clearly saw them eating someone's head through the window. Hearing this, the director's patience finally snapped. He shot an angry glare at Levi and demanded to know what exactly he was hiding. Annoyed by the accusation, Levi threw his blanket aside with irritation and said he wasn't hiding anything at all. But at that very moment, something under the blanket suddenly began to glow faintly. The director rubbed the bridge of his nose, clearly losing his patience. In a tired voice, he pointed out that something inside Levi's pants was glowing. Levi looked down in confusion, and sure enough, there really was a strange light coming from there. When he reached inside, he pulled out a flashlight. Without making a big deal of it, he casually handed the flashlight over to the director. Sean wanted to question them further about where they had gotten the demon's fur. But before he could continue, the boys quickly crawled back under their blankets and announced that they were going to sleep. The director let out a long, exhausted sigh. At 54 years old, he had never imagined that dealing with these two would be the reason all his hair would eventually turn gray. Finally giving up for the night, he switched off the light in their room, wished them a quiet good night, and slowly stepped back out into the dim hallway. After the door closed, Jasper quietly asked Levi if he felt full after their unusual meal. Levi calmly replied that yes, he was completely satisfied. Still, something bothered him. He couldn't understand why the director always managed to discover the things he tried to hide, yet never seemed to find anything that belonged to Jasper. Jasper grinned and explained his little trick. Whenever the director came around to inspect them, he simply hid his needles inside his hair. Hearing that, Levi fell silent for a moment. Then he began to seriously consider that maybe he should grow his hair longer as well. The story then shifts away from the hospital and moves to the headquarters of the city's Special Forces Division. Inside the building, a one-eyed man sat with a troubled expression. The constant cries and grief-filled screams of the fallen soldiers' families had given him a terrible headache. He muttered angrily that he only needed time. Once he tracked down the demonic beast responsible, he would skin it alive and grind its bones into dust. Just then, his phone rang. He answered the call, only to discover it was the director of the psychiatric clinic. The old man claimed that the psychos from Ward 666 had made a carpet out of a demonic dog. The one-eyed man assumed the director must simply be exhausted and talking nonsense. But the director insisted that everything he said was true and invited him to come see the rug himself. Before the one-eyed man could even respond, the director suddenly hung up the phone. The man quietly walked over to a control panel mounted beside the large window in his office and touched it thoughtfully. With a soft mechanical sound, the window slid open. The one-eyed man stepped forward until he was standing right on the windowsill. Without hesitation, he jumped down from the high-rise building. Even as he fell, he wondered why he was bothering to visit that stubborn old director. Meanwhile, Liam continued investigating the strange incident. He was absolutely certain about what he had seen. The patients had been eating a head. Now he kept asking himself where they could possibly have hidden it. As he walked around the dark area near the clinic, something unusual suddenly caught his attention. Lying on the ground ahead of him was a massive skull. Nearby were scattered bones and chunks of bloody flesh. Liam frowned, confused about why the head he saw earlier seemed so enormous. Suddenly, a strange noise came from somewhere behind him. Startled, he slowly turned his head to look back, trying to understand what had made that sound. But when he turned his attention back to the skull on the ground, he froze in shock. The skull had completely disappeared. Before he could react, an invisible force slammed into him and threw his body violently onto the ground. As he lay there helplessly, Liam felt the strength slowly draining out of his body and realized that his life was slipping away. At the same time, the director was also searching the area nearby. He suspected that the demon might have crawled up through the sewer hatch, but strangely, he couldn't close the heavy manhole. While he was examining the open hatch, a massive demon skull suddenly flew straight toward him, rushing forward as if trying to attack. When the director turned around in alarm, he saw the enormous skull suspended in the air. Someone was holding it firmly from behind with one hand. That person was the one-eyed man. Calmly holding the skull, he remarked that it belonged to a second-ranked demon dog. He then asked the director what exactly had happened to the creature. The director stood up and brushed the dust from his clothes, reminding him that he had already explained everything over the phone. However, the one-eyed man still found it hard to believe. After all, It sounded ridiculous. Ordinary people simply couldn't defeat a demon. The director explained that the boy involved, although technically a psychiatric patient, was far from ordinary. Then he handed the one-eyed man a thick folder and told him to read it carefully. Inside the folder was a detailed analysis of the strange behavior of the patients in Ward 666. As the one-eyed man read through the documents, his expression slowly turned to one of genuine surprise. According to the records, the boy had faced death again and again, yet each time he somehow survived unharmed. His limbs remained intact, and his body always appeared perfectly fine afterward. Simple luck couldn't explain that. In other words, the patients of Ward 666 had truly killed the demon dog. But neither the director nor the one-eyed man could understand how they had managed to do it. The director then added one more detail. After killing the demon, the boys had apparently cooked and eaten it. Hearing that, the one-eyed man's interest immediately grew. He said that he definitely needed to meet these unusual talents himself. Meanwhile, Levi and Jasper were sitting in an open clearing, playing a simple game together. The rule was straightforward. The first person to look away would lose. Jasper tried his hardest to win. He even teased Levi, saying that Levi might as well look away now since he clearly had no chance of winning. Surprisingly, in the very next moment, Levi actually looked away. Jasper immediately burst into laughter, extremely pleased with his unexpected victory. Hidden nearby, the one-eyed man and the clinic director watched the entire scene carefully. The one-eyed man knew very well that staring directly at the sun for too long could burn a person's retina. Yet this boy had been looking for an incredibly long time, without any harm at all. At that moment, he finally understood. The boy possessed a rare, innate body. He turned toward the director and asked whether he could take the boy with him if his suspicions about that special body were confirmed. The director was stunned by the sudden proposal. For a moment, he simply stared at the man, unsure if he had heard correctly. Then he said that the one-eyed man could take Levi without any problem, and even Jasper could go along as a bonus. However, he added one condition. Once the boys left, they would not be returned, and the one-eyed man would have to sign a document stating that the hospital would bear no responsibility for whatever happened afterward. The one-eyed man confidently replied that nothing bad would happen to the boys under his supervision. Even if they faced demons directly, he would personally ensure their safety. The director nodded slowly but admitted that he was actually more worried about the one-eyed man himself getting hurt. The one-eyed man explained that something strange was happening throughout the city. Large sinkholes were appearing everywhere without warning. At critical moments, there simply weren't enough fighters to deal with the demons. He couldn't protect the entire city alone, and if these boys truly possessed warrior bodies, then training them would only help. The director sighed deeply. In truth, he felt both relief and exhaustion at the thought of finally placing the burden of dealing with those troublesome boys onto the shoulders of the one-eyed man. The one-eyed man spoke with a serious expression. He explained that demons were evolving far too quickly. Once their intelligence improved, they started learning human weaknesses, even disguising themselves as harmless pets. If he hadn't personally seen the surveillance footage, he admitted he would have never believed such a thing. The director slowly let out a tired sigh. In a quiet voice, he said that fate could be incredibly unpredictable, often bringing events that no one could possibly anticipate. The one-eyed man reassured him not to worry too much. As a national-level warrior, his destiny was deeply tied to the safety of this city. No matter how powerful the demons became, he would continue to stand and fight for it. He added that sooner or later, he would confront these demons face to face. Avoiding them was never an option. Still, he understood that the strength of a single person had its limits. If there was even a small chance to discover and train more warriors, he would do it without hesitation, for the sake of protecting the entire city. Then he walked closer to the boys and calmly said that he knew what had happened last night. According to what he heard, they had eaten a second-ranked demon, a mourning dog. Standing tall over them, he looked down and asked directly if they were truly the ones responsible for killing it. He then asked them exactly how they had managed to defeat the demon. The two patients exchanged glances for a moment, silently agreeing on something. After that brief moment, they casually answered that they hadn't killed anyone and definitely hadn't eaten the dog. According to them, the creature had simply died on its own, and they knew absolutely nothing about it. The one-eyed man decided to test them personally. A faint glowing aura wrapped around his hand as he slowly directed the energy toward Levi's face. He quickly noticed something strange. Levi showed almost no reaction at all. With reflexes like that, even someone with a natural body would only qualify as a third-rate warrior at best. Jasper then tilted his head and casually remarked that it looked like this man was trying to help them with cultivation. Both boys looked at the one-eyed man and politely thanked him, as if he had just offered them a kind favor. However, Levi calmly added that the one-eyed man probably wasn't suitable to guide him in cultivation. After all, missing one eye would make it difficult to properly supervise the process. He repeated his reasoning without hesitation. Since the man only had one eye, it would naturally make training someone much harder. At that moment, Jasper suddenly jumped into the conversation. He suggested that the one-eyed man could simply let him heal the missing eye first, and then they could cultivate together afterward. The one-eyed man began to suspect that these strange remarks were the suicidal behaviors described in the files he had read. If these boys didn't possess innate bodies, they would have already killed themselves hundreds of times over. Jasper confidently explained that Levi had grown much stronger already. What Levi needed now was to raise his cultivation level further, and he even offered to cure the one-eyed man's eye to make that possible. Levi added proudly that Jasper was an expert in acupuncture. According to him, Jasper's skills were amazing, and there was no doubt he could fix the man's eye. Jasper then began walking around the one-eyed man, examining him carefully while continuing to offer his medical help with enthusiasm. The one-eyed man chuckled quietly. Even the famous national-level doctors from the Great Academy of Medicine had never dared to promise they could restore his eye. Compared to them, these two mentally unstable boys hardly seemed convincing. Still amused, he sat down on the grass beside Levi and agreed to try it anyway. Since his cultivation allowed him to stop armor-piercing bullets with his bare hands, he saw no real harm in letting these two psychos play with acupuncture. He told Jasper that he could try inserting a single needle. After all, it was only a tiny needle. What harm could it possibly cause? However, after Jasper began his work, the one-eyed man suddenly realized that his entire head had been covered with needles, and a strange sensation slowly began spreading through him. Jasper activated what he proudly called his universe rotation technique and raised another needle. The one-eyed man frowned and asked whether he was just sticking them in randomly. Jasper shook his head confidently and replied that this technique was very real and even had its own name. According to him, it was a special method he had developed after years of observing the movement of space and the universe. He assured the man that thanks to this technique, many people had supposedly recovered from their illnesses. The one-eyed man laughed softly. The fact that he could even feel something happening was already surprising. He still treated the entire situation as a joke and didn't even activate his defensive technique. Yet he never expected that such a small needle could trigger a resonance within his inner energy source. Before he could finish speaking, Jasper suddenly inserted another needle directly into his forehead. In that instant, the one-eyed man felt a strange shock inside his head, as if something had suddenly exploded deep within his brain. His vision blurred immediately, and he began losing consciousness as his body tilted forward. Fortunately, Levi reacted quickly and grabbed him before he could fall face first onto the ground. Levi calmly announced that the man had simply fainted. Jasper looked upset and assumed that something must have gone wrong with his new technique. Still, he was relieved that they had tested it on someone else first. After thinking for a moment, Jasper suddenly said he understood what the problem was and promised that it wouldn't happen again next time. He then suggested that Levi try the technique as well. Levi trusted his friend and agreed without hesitation. However, after some time passed, Jasper discovered that Levi had also fainted. Now he was even more confused about what exactly was wrong with his technique. Realizing the method still needed improvement, Jasper wondered who else would ever be willing to test something so risky. Eventually, he decided to test the technique on himself. Not long after starting, he also lost consciousness and collapsed. When the director later approached the clearing, he found all three of them lying unconscious on the ground. At that moment, he finally understood why the security guards had been unable to locate them earlier. He was shocked that even a national-level warrior had agreed to experiment with the strange methods of these two boys. Seeing the situation, he suddenly began to worry about the safety of the entire city. The scene then shifts to the emergency department. A special hotline reserved for the psychiatric clinic suddenly rang at the reception desk. The hospital staff immediately understood what that call meant, and their faces quickly filled with dread. As expected, the caller was the director of the psychiatric hospital. He urgently requested that an ambulance be sent to their location. He explained that besides the two problematic patients, there was now also a third victim involved. Not long after, several ambulances arrived at the clinic, loaded the injured individuals inside, and quickly drove away. The ambulance driver was a strange sight himself, a man whose eyes were completely covered by a blood-stained bandage. The clinic staff watched in confusion, wondering how someone who couldn't even see could possibly drive a vehicle. The driver calmly explained that he had recently undergone eye surgery, but he knew this road so well that he could practically drive it from memory. After that, the director and the clinic staff watched the ambulance struggle several times while trying to leave the courtyard. They didn't know whether to feel worried or impressed that the vehicle somehow managed not to crash on its very first turn. Meanwhile, Lee, who was working at the hospital, was growing extremely irritated and wished this entire situation would finally come to an end. For a brief moment, a dark thought crossed his mind. He even imagined arranging some kind of accident so those two troublesome cultivators would disappear forever. But he quickly snapped back to reality and slapped himself lightly on the cheek, reminding himself that he was a doctor who had sworn to save lives. He then decided to call Sean, wondering whether he hadn't humbled himself enough last time for the director to send those two strange people back to him again. To make matters worse, this time there was also a third person accompanying them. The director calmly replied that he had already suggested before that it would be easier if the boys simply stayed there instead of constantly transporting them back and forth. Lee was shocked by that suggestion. If they stayed permanently, he wouldn't be able to work at all. Several doctors had already quit because of the chaos caused by those patients. Finally, the director promised to provide some form of moral compensation. Hearing that softened Lee's mood slightly, even though he doubted that the old man would actually give anything generous. The director then calmly told Lee that the simplest solution was to leave those two troublesome guys under his care for a while. He added that Lee really had no choice in the matter, because if he refused, the director would report the bribe to the police. According to him, the evidence he possessed was more than enough to prove everything. After saying that without hesitation, the director ended the call. Lee remained standing there in stunned silence, still holding the phone as he tried to process what had just happened. Meanwhile, while the doctors were busy performing surgery on Levi, the system suddenly issued a notification. It reported that an SS rank upgrade had been completed automatically. This unlocked a new option, an S-rank defensive technique called Impenetrable Golden Body, which could increase the durability of Levi's body by a full 100%. Since Levi once again failed to make a choice himself, the system calmly selected the upgrade for him. Elsewhere in the hospital, everything seemed to continue as normal. Staff moved through the corridors, patients rested in their rooms, and the building carried on with its usual quiet routine. Liam, who had been attacked at the clinic earlier, was now recovering under the care of a young woman. She gently fed him with a spoon, and the man was clearly delighted by the attention. In his heart, he had always believed it was impossible to randomly meet such a kind girl, but somehow fate had surprised him. The girl mentioned shyly that she had recently gained some weight. She told Liam that if he didn't mind that, then everything would be fine. With a hopeful smile, she added that she would lose the extra weight again in about 5 months. Liam immediately shook his head and said it didn't matter at all. Whether she lost the weight or not, he would still like her just the same. He even said he was grateful to fate for bringing them together like this. The girl gave him a sweet smile and quietly replied that she would make sure to pass those kind words along to the director who had actually arranged their meeting. However, Liam suddenly grew serious and admitted that he had some bad news. He explained that he was infertile and asked her if she would still consider a relationship with him even if they could never have children of their own. The girl calmly handed him a peeled apple and said that it didn't bother her at all. If they wanted a child in the future, they could always adopt one from an orphanage. Then she asked him with curiosity whether he would prefer a boy or a girl. Liam smiled warmly and said that he would really love to raise a little girl someday. But when the girl laughed and admitted that she would prefer a boy instead, Liam quickly changed his answer and said that whatever she wanted would be perfect. Just then, a doctor entered the room and informed them that Liam's condition was stable. He advised the patient to avoid intense emotions and said he could probably be discharged later that evening. At that moment, a nurse peeked into the room and mentioned that new patients had arrived after surgery. The doctor nodded and asked the nurse to bring them into the same room. When the patients were wheeled in, Liam was shocked to see that one of them was Levi. He immediately pointed at Levi with a trembling finger. His whole body started shaking with fear as he shouted that this was the guy who had eaten a man. Overcome with panic, Liam suddenly collapsed onto the floor. The doctor rushed over immediately to check on him. Soon afterward, Levi and Jasper were placed in hospital beds. At the same time, the system was amazed to discover that its host had reached the late stage of the human level in only 2 days. After resting for a while, Levi slowly regained consciousness. He felt extremely tired but quickly realized that he definitely didn't want to stay in the same room with these people. Meanwhile, Liam continued crying loudly, begging the hospital staff to move him to another room as soon as possible. When Liam turned his head again, he saw that Levi had already woken up and was calmly saying that he was hungry and wanted something to eat. The moment Liam heard those words, he remembered everything that had happened before and fainted again from pure shock. In another hospital bed nearby, the one-eyed man was trying to understand what had happened to him. With his level of strength, even a direct gunshot to the head shouldn't have left the slightest mark. Yet somehow he had lost consciousness almost instantly after that strange guy pushed another needle into him. He simply couldn't understand how some random psycho had managed to bring down a national-level warrior like himself. As soon as Levi and Jasper noticed that their new acquaintance had woken up, they immediately hurried over to his bed. Jasper looked disappointed and apologized for failing to heal the man's eye earlier. However, he confidently said that if he was given another chance, he could definitely fix it. The one-eyed man looked at him for a moment and slowly replied that he could try again if he really wanted to. Hearing that, Jasper became so happy that he almost cried. He excitedly pulled out his needles and promised that this time the treatment would definitely work. But before long, nurses and doctors rushed into the room shouting that the patient was in danger. His entire head had been filled with needles, and he needed immediate surgery. Jasper looked extremely depressed after that failure. Levi gently reassured him, saying that he would definitely succeed the next time. Meanwhile, the one-eyed man still couldn't understand why he had fainted again and why his cervical vertebra had somehow become dislocated. He simply refused to believe such a thing was possible. Even when a 9th-ranked demon had nearly crushed all the bones in his body, he had never lost consciousness. At that moment, Jasper approached him once again and apologized sincerely for failing to cure his eye. He insisted that next time he would definitely succeed. He leaned closer and asked if the man would allow him to perform the treatment just one more time. However, the one-eyed man clearly had no desire to experience acupuncture again. Jasper burst into tears and turned toward Levi, complaining that the one-eyed man simply didn't trust him. The one-eyed man then realized that he had to try once more, if only to confirm whether the strange effects were really caused by the acupuncture. The moment Jasper heard that, his face lit up with excitement, and he pulled the hidden needles out of his hair again. Before long, nurses and doctors rushed into the ward once more, shouting that the dangerous needles being used by the psycho had to be confiscated immediately. Jasper sat there looking completely depressed, feeling that he had failed yet again. Meanwhile, a nurse began searching through their entire room, trying to locate and remove any remaining needles. It soon became clear that the one-eyed man's right leg had been temporarily paralyzed. The doctor advised that he needed proper rest to recover.